Good morning, everybody. How are you? Saturday, May 1st already. Can't believe it's May. So today's class is Irrigation Basics. We've got John Windsor doing the class. So I am going to go over a few slides with you this morning. I'm going to go over some housekeeping slides. All right. So here are our upcoming classes. Today is May 1st, Irrigation Basics. We've got one class once a month through December. Those are all the class names, topics, and dates. Our class today is roughly 1 hour, followed by a question and answer period. Each class is recorded. So next week, our recording will go back up on our website, so you can view past classes. If you've missed a class, you can go in and watch the recording. And there's also, it's on the same page where you RSVP, where the list of the upcoming classes are. So we keep all of our recorded classes on our site for future reference. Okay, I'm gonna go over, okay, so let's see. So what we do is the class, you're in listen only mode for the entire class. I'm gonna do these slides here, then John will go through the presentation itself. At the end of the presentation, we'll have the question and answer. So there is a chat box that is on your screen. If you click the red arrow that's on the right of your screen, it will open up the chat box. So as we go through the class, if you have any questions, just start typing the questions in. And that way, at the end of the presentation, I will open up that screen and I will start reading the questions, and then John will answer them. The other item is handouts. We have one handout is this actual presentation, the housekeeping slides. That way you can keep all this information, and also the handout slides for the presentation itself. So if you'd like to take a moment now and save those to your computer, you can do that. Once this class is over, the file's no longer available. If you watch a recording of the class, watching the recording, you will not be able to download the slides. So if you want to take a moment to do it now, if you don't, just send me an email and I will send them to you directly. So the email, my email is at the bottom, kdankinger@scvwa.org. And my name is Karen Dankinger. So you can always send me an email about anything, class related or not class related, water related. And I can just send you the presentations after the class. When the class is over, you will receive a short survey. It's 3 questions. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes to answer the questions, it just helps us see what our class participants are interested in learning more of, or something different that we can do, and that definitely helps us, so we appreciate that. So this is a quick slide on who we are. SCV Water shows the area that we service, the size of the area that we service. This one is how to find us. So we are on the internet. We're on, our website is yourscvwater.com, yourscvwater.com. We also have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube videos. We have rebates to help you when you're working in your yard. To find our rebates, it's conserve.yourscvwater.com. So all of our rebates are listed there. We have a couple of resources, some landscape resources. We've got the yourscvwater.com/landscape inspiration information. And then we've got SantaClaritaGardens.com, and then conservation tips from the yourscvwater.com page. So today's rebate that we're focusing on is the HELP program. HELP is Health and Efficient Landscape Programs. Rebates up to $750. It's upgrading your irrigation hardware by selecting what works for you, whether it's drip, high efficiency nozzles, pressure regulation, or both, a combination of both. So that's today's rebate. We like to focus on a different rebate for each class based on what class we're offering. And you can find all of our rebates on conserveyourscvwater.com. All right, now I'm going to open up the actual class presentation, and then John will get started. As he goes through, you'll hear him say next, and that is just telling me to forward to the next slide. So John, you're up.
Okay. Morning, folks. Thanks for being with us. So this is a basic class on landscaping, and hopefully you'll learn a few tips from this. We're going to talk about different types of irrigation, including the standard sprinkler irrigation and drip irrigation. Next. Next. There we go. Okay. So irrigation is simply the placement of water, the bringing of water from a source to a plant, uh, replacing water that is lost through evaporation or just the plant using it itself. And that's an interesting statement right there. On average, 70% of the total household water use in the Santa Clarita Valley is outdoors. So if we can conserve a little water outdoors, it'll go a long way towards reducing the use of water in the household. Next. So watering landscape plants is typically overdone. In other words, we do water quite a bit more than we need to. Our lawns, for instance, use up 50 to 80% of all of the outdoor watering. So by reducing the size of the lawn or reducing the lawns entirely, we can conserve quite a bit of water. And different plants use less water too. If we can switch to the California friendly plants, they don't necessarily have to be native. They can be from anywhere around the world that has the same sort of climate that we do. We'll definitely use less water by planting those types of plants. Examples of areas that have the same climate and soil types as us would be the Mediterranean region, South Africa, parts of Australia, and parts of Mexico. So we'll get back to that first statement up there about landscape plants typically being overwatered. I have found that here up there it says it's overwatered by 50%, but imagine this. Most of the trees and shrubs in your yard only need to be watered once a week. So if you're watering daily, you're watering perhaps 6 times more than the plants actually need. So in that case, your plants are being overwatered by considerably more than 50%. Next. And here are some very good principles for you to remember. Water deeply, but infrequently. In other words, water the entire root system, but then don't water again for a while. Plants need air in the soil as much as they need water. And when you apply water, it pushes the air out. So if we can vary the frequency, then air can enter again. The next statement there, water where you want. The plant's roots expand every year as the plants grow. So keep that in mind when designing an irrigation system. To avoid runoff, only apply the water as fast as it can be absorbed by the soil. And as you probably know, different types of soil can absorb water at different rates. A sandy soil can absorb water very quickly, whereas a clay soil absorbs it slowly but retains it for a very long period of time. Next. So now we're going to take just a basic look at some of the components of your irrigation system. Some of these components you'll be familiar with, uh, and for others this might seem new, but it's not terribly complicated. Next. So this particular diagram starts at the water meter. This is where the water is pumped to your house, and when it gets to your house, there's typically a backflow-proof venter and then a pressure regulator to control the pressure coming off the street going into your house. Now, sometimes irrigation systems are built or installed prior to the pressure regulator. And if that's true, then you might have really high pressure going to your faucets or your irrigation system, at which time you may have to add another additional pressure regulator. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Then we have the controller. That's the box. That's what you press the time and date into, and it actually turns your valves on and off. Shut-off valves should be installed prior to the valves. In other words, after the water comes into your yard, there should be a shut-off near your valves. In case you have to work on the valves, it would be nice to be able to shut the water off without turning the water off at the street. In other words, you should be able to work on your irrigation system and still have water flowing to the house. And then we have the valves. So the valves are the automated part that actually allows the water to pass through or stops the water. The controller will tell the valves. The controller sends a little 24-volt signal to the valves to tell them to open or close. And that's all programmed in the controller. And then beyond the valves, we have the pipes, fittings, and finally the sprinkler heads, where the water finally comes out to water your yard. Next. So valves control the flow of water, and the size of your yard and other factors will determine the size of the valve. There are 3/4 inch valves for residential use, and there's 1-inch valves for larger areas. Most valves are automatic. In other words, they're controlled by a sprinkler controller. There are some manual valves, and these you simply turn on and off at your convenience. By law, there will be vacuum breakers built into your system. Most valves have not just the automated part that turns your water on and off, but they also have a vacuum breaker that allows the water to drain in one particular area instead of going back into the pressure line. Next. Then the piping. The piping is PVC pipe, which is polyvinyl chloride. Schedule 40 is the most common used pipe. It's the most durable and cost effective. Typically comes in 1/2 inch, 3/4, and 1-inch sizes. Depending on the size of the valve you're using, that would determine the size of the piping you're going to use for your main line. So if you've got a 3/4 inch valve, you'll have 3/4 inch pipe, 1-inch, etc. For bigger yards, 1-inch piping is typically used. You can see right there that it says for more than 150 feet, you typically want to use 2 sizes. But most of our yards don't extend 150 feet in any one direction. Okay. Now then there's the glue. And this is how you assemble the pieces. The pieces just fit right together and you glue them. And there are various fittings for making turns, for teeing off, or for just joining the pipe together. The threaded fittings would be at the valve and at the sprinklers. And for those, you would use Teflon tape. Next. Now the valve manifold, that's where the valves are. Typically your valves are placed together for ease of working. By having your valves together, you can run less piping, less wiring, because there is a wire that will come from your controller to these valves. And typically the valves are close to your water source. And as we mentioned before, there should be a shutoff valve prior to them. And these valves, when they're turned on or off, will send water to the various zones. Next. So when putting the system together, we use glue, and sometimes for our high pressure lines, we use a primer and glue. And these things work quite well, and you don't have to use an awful lot. In fact, if you use too much glue, it'll get shot through your system and clog up your sprinklers. So typically when you're installing a new system, you don't put the sprinkler heads on right away. You install all your piping and your risers, and then you flush the system out by turning the water on. Next. So your controller, this it's good to know your controller. It's good to understand it. This will be your friend. Nowadays they have things called smart controllers that use sensors and weather stations, etc., to determine how to run the sprinklers. And they're good. They're fine. Uh, I'm a little old-fashioned. I kind of like to program and set my clock myself. I know which areas of my yard are shadier. I know where the north side is, the east, the west, and the south. That has to be programmed in to your controller because your smart controller doesn't know where north, south, east, or west is, which areas of your yard are the hottest or the driest or the wettest. They can tell you though if using weather patterns, etc. They can increase the amount of water to a particular area when it's hot or windy, and they can decrease it when it's overcast, cold, or rainy. So the smart controllers do some wonderful things. Next. So there's many different types of timers, controllers, and they are all good. And nowadays they are just so fancy. You can have multiple start times. What I like on most of these new ones is that you can program each valve to run on a particular day for a particular length of time. For instance, your lawn. Your lawn in the heat of summer may need to be watered 4 times a week. So you can set those zones to water 4 times a week for however many minutes are necessary. Your trees and shrubs only need to be watered once a week, so you can set them to come on just 1 day a week. And it can be a different day than your lawn is coming on. If you have a drip system attached to one of your valves, that may need to be watered for a much longer period of time. For instance, in my situation, I run my drip system for 1 hour, 1 day a week. So I certainly wouldn't want to run my regular sprinkler system for 1 hour. Imagine how much water that would be putting out. So most of these new clocks have the ability to program each valve, each zone, to do whatever you'd like it to do. Next. So the typical irrigation system starts at the main water supply. And from there, you should install a shutoff first, of course, then your valves, which you saw your valve manifold, okay? Then decide where you're going to run the pipes to the various stations, the various sprinklers. Where are you going to put the sprinklers? And you have to determine how many sprinklers you're going to put on each valve. And once again, if you're designing a system, you may want to obviously have a thought in mind as to if you're going to have a lawn, where's that going to be? If you're going to have trees and shrubs, where are they going to be? If you're going to have a vegetable garden, where are they going to be? And then use different valves to run to those different areas. As I mentioned, it's good to flush out your lines before you install the heads to get all the glue, any dirt or debris that may have gotten into the system. And once again, you will have to run wiring from your timer, your controller, to each of the valves. So it's not a terribly complicated system at all. And if you, or at least if you don't do it yourself, if you're at least there when it's done, you'll have some idea of what's happening, and would be wonderful to be able to. I certainly designed my own, but when we move into a house that's already got an irrigation system in, we just pretty much have to live with it at that point. Next. So the two major types of irrigation systems are the typical overhead sprinkler system, like you use on your lawn, maybe on the ground covers, on slopes, and heavily landscaped area. And they measure the water in gallons per minute. That means every minute that the sprinklers are coming out, X number of gallons are coming out. The other type of system is called a drip system. And this is used typically for areas with individual plants, individual trees, shrubs, smaller areas like small flower beds, window boxes, narrow planters, and vegetable gardens. And the water that comes out of those emitters is registered or measured in gallons per hour. So when I told you that I run my drip system for an hour, well, just imagine if you had simply a 1 gallon per hour emitter on your tube. In 1 hour, you'd only be watering 1 gallon. So running a drip system for 1 hour is not extravagant by any means. Next. So we'll talk now about overhead irrigation. This is the type of irrigation that most lawns have. Next. And the different types of sprinklers. Most are pop-up types. For large areas like parks, you'll see these rainbird style systems. These are big pop-ups that come up and go and water huge areas. So if you have a great big yard, a large lawn, you may have these types of sprinklers simply because they cover so much area. If you have a typical residential yard, you will have pop-up sprays, and your sprinklers will be called 3-inch pop-ups, 4-inch pop-ups, or 6-inch pop-ups. And what that means is when the water pressure comes on, the nozzle pops up 3, 4, or 6 inches above ground, and then the water comes out. And this is typically used in lawns and, as I mentioned, ground cover areas and perhaps slopes. Next. And then stationary or shrub heads. The picture shown there of the brass heads, those you might find on older irrigation systems. They were used back in the 40s and 50s. They were the very first irrigation system. Can we go back to that slide, Karen? Wherever it was. But anyway, it showed a brass sprinkler head, and those aren't used too much anymore because they either don't pop up or don't pop up very high, so they certainly can't get up high enough to water most lawns. They also play havoc on lawnmowers. Okay? The other types of shrub heads are plastic, and they would be used to water areas where you don't need a pop-up. You need a pop-up in your lawn, but you probably don't need it in your shrub beds or other areas like that. Okay, now I guess we're going to talk about drip irrigation. Next. Okay, drip irrigation applies the water right where you want it. So you use either drip line, irrigation tubing, emitter tubing, or various emitters and things to bring the water from the main line to the actual plants. As I mentioned before, it's measured in gallons per hour, so you run drip systems for a longer period of time, but you're actually using less water, and you're only putting the water where it's needed. Drip irrigation has little or no runoff because the emitter is right on the ground and the water soaks right in. It waters the root system usually quite thoroughly, certainly better than a lot of overhead sprinklers do. So thus your plants don't get stressed. Weeds are reduced because you're not putting water everywhere. You're simply putting it at the root zones of the various plants. Lower flow rates are required, so you can actually run these systems you can water a larger area with less water than you could with a standard sprinkler system. And typically installed above ground, so you don't have to do any trenching or anything like that. I like to have my system visible so I can see that it's working. Next. The disadvantages are the high maintenance. In other words, you have to see that the system is working. You don't want to have a clogged sprayer, and you certainly don't want a plant to die because an emitter was clogged with dirt or debris. So that's why I like to have mine visible so I can actually see that it's working. Typically, these things don't wash off the foliage of your plants. Some plants like roses actually like to have their foliage sprayed. It helps to wash off a lot of insects. It can actually wash off powdery mildew. So sometimes a combination of sprays and drips work well for plants like roses. There are some additional parts that you would add to the system. Certainly a filter. A filter would remove any debris or sediment. And pressure regulators, if you are running your system directly from the street without going through a regulator, because drip irrigation can run on much less pressure. Susceptible to rodent damage. In other words, ground squirrels, gophers, they can chew on these little parts, on these emitters, in an attempt to get water. So that's another reason for wanting the system to be somewhat visible so that you can see if there's any damage. And there is the potential for clogging. That's why filters are recommended. The emitters put out a small amount of water because they have a very small opening, and that could get clogged. Next. So drip systems can be done by the homeowner. They're actually very simple to install, and just a few things you have to learn. One is you shouldn't run your drip system more than 300 feet. If you're going to be putting an awful lot of plants or emitters on the tube, I would hold it to about 100 feet per length of tubing. Design the system for mature plant watering. You might be planting little bitty plants right now, but they're going to grow, and you have to keep that in mind when you're designing your system. As time goes on, you will be adding more emitters or bubblers or whatever you're using to your system to cover the plants. At least 50% of the root system should be watered by the drip irrigation. If you're on a slope, put your emitter uphill. Okay, and then place the emitters not next to the trunks of the trees or shrubs, but out under the canopy, and use more than one emitter per plant or tree. Some larger shrubs may need 4 emitters placed on all 4 sides of the shrub. Once again, filtration. This is an important but very easy part to install. And a pressure regulator. Most pressure regulators for drip systems will drop the pressure to either 20 or 30 psi. And your household pressure is typically set at 50, the pressure regulator on your house. The reason I bring that up is because quite often you will have a faucet that comes out of the wall of your house. If so, that has already gone through the pressure regulator, and that pressure would be brought down to about 50. Next. So here are the pieces, here are the components. You can buy separate valves for drip irrigation, or you can use your standard valves. A pressure regulator, a strainer or filter, if you would, are installed right there at the very beginning. And then you connect your tubing to it. You run your tubing out into the yard, to the plants, install your emitters, use stakes to hold your emitters and your tubing in place. And then they do also have conversion kits where you can convert a sprinkler or a sprinkler riser to drip irrigation. So if your yard is already plumbed with PVC piping and risers, very easy to convert that over to drip. Next. And then the tubing. And there are 2 types of tubing. One is simply the main line that carries water from one area to the other. And at the end of the line, you cap it off or use a figure 8 to end it, and then the line will build up pressure and the water will come out. The other type of tubing, shown right in the middle of the screen there, is called emitter tubing. They have emitters built in. So there are no little pieces that can be chewed off by rodents or broken by the gardener when he's raking or cleaning. So those are the 2 types of tubing, one to bring water to an area, and the other, emitter tubing, to actually emit the water. Next. And then the various types of filters or strainers, and they also have straight inline filters that are very inexpensive that you could apply anywhere in line. And these take out all of the debris, all of the sand. You will not get clogs using a strainer type filter or any other type of inline filter. Next. So now we'll talk a little bit about the efficiency of both of these types. Next. So system uniformity simply means how evenly is the water being applied. If you get a brown spot or a dead spot in the middle of your lawn, it's quite possible that your sprinklers are not covering the lawn uniformly. And that's quite easy to figure out. Just take a couple of clear drinking cups and place them in your lawn in different areas and turn the system on for 10 minutes and then go out and look at the cups and see how much water has fallen into each of those cups. Okay? Sometimes the problem could be a broken sprinkler head or the sprinkler head not working correctly, perhaps clogged. Sometimes it was the design. You did not have, it wasn't designed with head-to-head coverage. Sometimes different types of sprinkler heads are used on the same system. They might put out water at different rates. Sometimes the sprinkler gets hit by a lawnmower, at which time it might get tilted or turned or twisted. And then, of course, in shrub areas, keep in mind when the plants grow, they could block the flow of the water. Another problem could be pressure. Once again, too many sprinklers on one line will drop your pressure and your heads may not pop up anymore. The sprinklers may not shoot as far as they are supposed to. Next. So this just kind of shows you what good uniformity will do and poor uniformity. The areas that don't get covered very well won't get the water down deeply, and the roots of the plants won't go down deeply. And during hot weather, they will dry up, or in the case of your lawn, perhaps die. Next. So this might be a little difficult to see, but on the right side, you can see that these sprinklers are evenly placed. Now that says 20 feet between sprinklers, meaning the types of nozzles we would put in there would be 20-foot nozzles. They would shoot 20 feet, meaning they would shoot to the next sprinkler and vice versa. On the left side of the screen, that's helter-skelter. Many different types of sprinklers are used, 15-footers, 10-footers, 30-footers, and this would be very difficult to maintain a system like this, and we would not expect uniformity with the sprinkler system on the left. Next. So don't mix sprinkler types. Once again, we are in this particular slide, we're showing regular pop-up sprinklers, standard sprinklers, non-moving sprinklers, mixed with what are called stream sprinklers. Stream sprinklers shoot the water further, but have to be run longer to put as much water over any given area. So mixing sprinkler types will almost always end up with either overwatering or underwatering or dead spots. Next. So here's a system in which they added drip directly with sprinklers. And your sprinklers, you typically only turn your sprinklers on for a limited amount of time. I would think a maximum of most people would run their sprinklers for say 10 minutes. Now, if our drip irrigation nozzles are rated at gallons per hour in 10 minutes, how much water did we actually put out? Well, are you done doing the math? About 1/6 of a gallon. Now, it might be fine for a little bedding plant or something, but it's certainly not going to be adequate for a shrub or a tree. So keep that in mind if you're going to be mixing your drip sprinklers with your standard irrigation system. Okay, next. Now, we talked about a sprinkler being hit by a lawnmower or a bicycle or stepped on or something like that. If that happens, it will tilt and the water will no longer be coming out uniformly. And the only way to really see this is every once in a while go out and examine your sprinklers, turn them on and take a real close look at it. And once again, don't forget the little cup system. Put those cups out there every once in a while and make sure you're getting really good coverage. Okay, next. So planter interference, once again, as plants grow up, they're going to block the sprinklers. If you don't have the right size pop-up, for instance, let's say you're growing a tall fescue lawn. Tall fescue lawns need to be maintained at 3 to 3.5 inches. Okay, if you only have a 3-inch pop-up sprinkler, it's barely going to get over the top of the lawn that is there around the sprinklers. That's why 4-inch sprinklers are pretty much the standard now. So they can pop up and over a 3.5-inch tall fescue lawn. Otherwise, you can see you're going to get an awful lot of water right there near the sprinkler and not too much elsewhere. Next. So extraordinarily high pressure will turn the sprinkler into mist. So if your sprinklers are misting, your pressure is very high, and that may have to be regulated to control this. We really don't want our water to turn into mist and evaporate before it hits the ground. And with really high pressure, that's exactly what will happen. Next. And then, of course, runoff is just wasteful. If you've got, in this case, it looks like about a 4-foot parkway, and you have an 8-foot sprinkler in there, half that water is going to go onto the parkway. So match your sprinklers to the size of the area to be watered. It's just wasteful. That water will simply be evaporated or run down the storm drains. So match your sprinklers to the size of the area. We also mentioned that if you have a slope and your water begins to run off, you may have to turn those sprinklers on for however many minutes you can, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, run them, and then an hour later put them on for 5 or 7 minutes. This is called cycling. If that slope can't take the full 15 minutes that it needs at one time, you maybe do 8 minutes and then an hour later do the other 7 so that you don't get runoff. Next. And scheduling. This is actually has to do with the clocks. Next. So this is a very important slide right here. How often should plants be watered? I'm asked that 100 times a day. And there's no real simple answer because it depends on so many factors. The depth of the roots. For instance, a tree. A tree would have deeper roots than turf. So trees typically need to be watered longer but less often than turf. If you have trees planted in your lawn, not much can be done. Your tree will simply have to survive off of the water that the turf gets. Okay. Another variable would be the type of soil. Sandy soils drain quickly. Clay soils hold that water for a long period of time. So if you have a clay soil, you can definitely water less often because that clay soil, once it gets wet, it hangs on to it. Okay. And then, of course, the time of year. If you've lived here for a while, you know we have bloody hot summers and they seem to be getting hotter every single year. We're setting records every year for the hottest year in recorded history. We're getting heat waves that are stronger, hotter, and longer than anything in history. So we just have to assume that this is just the way it's going to be, and every year is just going to get worse. We also get those Santa Ana winds, which come from out of the Great Basin. They bring hot air, and they cause the plants to transpire, thus using more water. So it would be wonderful to understand your timer so that you could change it depending on the various needs and the various times of the year. And as we've already mentioned, native plants and other types of plants may be able to go through summer with no water or very limited amounts of water, while tropicals require quite a lot. So if you have native oak trees and native plants, typically they would get most of their water from probably, the first rains usually come in November and they finish in April. So that means from perhaps May through October, those plants won't get any water in nature, and they've learned to survive. Leaf size, texture, color, and coating. You'll notice that a lot of these drought-tolerant plants have a very hard surface to the leaf. Quite often the leaves are small and very hard, and this prevents the transpiration or evaporation of water out of the leaf. Next. So we typically want to water during the early morning hours. Now, some research on lawns has shown that perhaps 6 to 8 a.m. might be best for your lawn. This will cut down on the number of insects and diseases. Quite often, diseases are caused by water staying on the leaf too long. If we water closer to sunrise, then the moisture won't be on the leaf surface for too terribly long. Okay. Also, early in the morning, the transpiration is low. Watering in late afternoon or evening is very bad, very bad. In fact, most studies have shown that watering after 11 a.m. is not recommended. So certainly watering anything in the late afternoon or evening can promote disease, tends to favor insects too. Okay? So watering during daylight hours increases water loss due to the wind, the sun, etc. So try to water just in the morning and preferably early morning. Next.
Okay, that was our last slide.
Oh, okay, very good.
I will open up the questions and we will get started on. Okay, as of now, I only have 3 questions. So if any of you would like to have some questions read out loud and answered by John, just you can go into the chat box and type them up. So question 1, how to refresh old drip emitters that seem clogged? Should we soak them in a bucket of vinegar or bleach or what?
Yeah, vinegar would be preferred, certainly preferred over bleach. And then consider replacement. They're relatively inexpensive. You can get a bag of 5 for usually about $3 or so. So if they aren't clogged too badly, first, try the vinegar. Second, try replacement. Next.
Okay, is there a way to know where the wire from the timer to the valves is located so not to hit when digging new plants?
Well, typically it's laid in the ground following the pipe line. So wherever your timer is, wherever that is, usually in a garage or something, to where your valves are, which shouldn't be too terribly far, that's where the sprinkler line will have to be. So just simply look at where the clock is, look at where the valves are, and figure the straightest line is probably uh, where the sprinkler line is. Nobody runs sprinkler lines through the middle of a yard, so I don't think that should be an issue.
All right. I have a long driveway lined with roses. I thought of switching to drip irrigation, but you pointed out roses like their leaves to get water also. Could I use drip in addition to once a week traditional above ground irrigation?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I do. Yes, if you have standard sprinklers that come on and water the plant, but you feel you're perhaps not getting enough water down at the base of the plants, I use drip bubblers uh, near the base of the roses to give them a good flooding while they're getting washed off by the standard sprinklers. So yes, in that case, the combination of sprinklers and drip actually works. Okay.
Next question. How often should you water newly planted plants?
Well, there's a lot of different information about that. I have printed up my own little routine for doing that. Obviously, it's very important to water your plant immediately the day you plant it. Uh, some plants, like little bedding plants, may need to be watered the following day. However, for a tree or a shrub, if you watered it thoroughly the first day, you can probably skip the second, then water it the third. Then, depending on the weather, you might be able to skip 2 days before the next watering, etc., etc. Um, but the very first watering that you give a plant is the most important. It needs to be the most thorough. And if your ground is still holding moisture, uh, and you know, there are little moisture meters that you can buy for about $10 that you can put in the ground, and it will actually tell you how wet or dry the soil is. The little needle will move, and that really is wonderful to help to determine the frequency of your watering. Okay.
Next, if we have hard water, will that affect drip irrigation systems, perhaps causing deposits that will block the emitters?
Well, most of us do have hard water. Uh, hard water simply means there's a lot of calcium in the water. The calcium is great for the plants. Uh, our irrigation water is great for the plants. It has magnesium in it and calcium and other minerals. Uh, over time, calcium deposits can build up. It takes quite a bit of time if you have a filtered system. In other words, a filter anywhere on your drip line. It takes quite a bit of time for the emitters to calcify. And the very first question had to do with how to clean those emitters when they do calcify, and vinegar seems to be the favorite answer. There's also a product called CLR, which removes calcium, lime, and rust. That's also another good one to soak your emitters in. Okay.
Next question. Do smart controllers use an app to set remotely?
Yes, absolutely. I've seen a number of people operate their timers, controllers by their phone. And yes, most of these new smart controllers connect to your smartphone.
Next question. On the emitter tubing, can you set where the hole is, or is it preset at every 12 inches?
They are preset. They're preset either at every 12 inches or every 18 inches. You can add external emitters if needed. Say you're planting a whole group of small plants near each other, and 1 inch spacing is, or I'm sorry, 1 foot spacing is too far apart, or 18-inch spacing is too far apart. You could then insert an emitter in line. So that's always an option. But yes, they are preset.
Okay, next question. I'd like to replace my front lawn with, not going to pronounce this, but curapaya.
Okay, yes, yeah. This is a
Okay.
new plant that it's related to Lipia. It's
Okay.
a ground cover. Hmm.
She says, I'm having trouble finding a local landscaper with experience installing this ground cover. Do you have a list of installers at Green Thumb? And by the way, everybody, John does work at Green Thumb. So asking if you have a list of installers at Green Thumb that she could come in and get from you.
Yes, I think so. We allow gardeners that shop in our store to drop off business cards, and we would happily uh, give you those cards for you to call the people and ask them what they can or cannot do. Uh, we certainly don't know anything about that. We simply pass out their cards to you. But yes, we would gladly do that.
All right, next question. I have been overseeding my back lawn with Dutch white clover and am now at about 50% clover to 50% marathon 1. How much less water does a clover lawn need?
Oh, about half. And so if you are in fact wanting to eliminate the rest of the blade grass in your back area, simply start reducing the frequency of your watering. And the uh, clover, many of us know clover as a weed that gets in our lawns, and we know it is tough, and it will grow, and it will crowd out the blade grasses. So it's durable, and it would be in fact more durable than the lawn that you have. So it could withstand watering less frequently than a typical lawn would.
All right, next question. If I just installed a drip irrigation system for my front lawn, would I be eligible for rebate? Sue, why don't you go, let me get I'm going to get your information down, and I'm going to send you an email, and I'll have one of our conservation coordinators contact you. I'm not sure. I think that you have to reach out to us ahead of time before you replace it, since we need to know. But I'm not, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure on the rebates right now. So I will, I'll send you an email and get a hold of you, and then we'll take it from there. But I'll have one of our conservation coordinators get a hold of you. So I've just written down your phone and your email address. Okay, Sue, we'll take care of that. And that was our last question. So
Oh,
does anybody else want to throw a question in before we, oh, here we go. Let's see. Thank you for another great and informative webinar. Your classes keep inspiring me to get out into my garden and make it nicer. Wonderful, Kathy. Thank you. That's really nice to hear. All right, anybody else? Okay. All right, looks like that's it. Another one, thank you very much. Very helpful information. All right, everybody. Our next class is Saturday, June 12th, Soils and Fertilizers. Saturday, June 12th, Soils and Fertilizers. Someone else said thank you both. And if you guys have any questions or want the handouts or anything like that after this class is over, please email me KDENKINGER@scvwa.org, and I'll be happy to send you the handouts. All right, Sue, I see that you need the handouts. I will send handouts. Donna said, I wanted to thank you since my first class a couple of months ago, I planted a sustainable garden, which is looking lovely. Wonderful, Donna. That's wonderful news. All right. Looks like that is the end of the questions and comments. So everybody, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Kathleen, I got your name. I will send you the handouts often. Also, sorry, I can't even talk. All right, I will send you the handouts also. All right, everybody. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.